I'm Chris Gabbitas, Artistic Director of Phoenix Chorale, and I'm sitting here with Rebecca Dale, who is the composer of a couple of pieces that the chorale's performing in our concerts next weekend on the 24th and 25th of January in Scottsdale Center for Performing Arts. And we are performing Rebecca's pieces, The Cloths of Heaven, which is a wonderful chamber piece for choir and soloist and piano and solo cello accompaniment, and then a symphonic work in six movements called When Music Sounds. Rebecca, great to meet you. It's the first time we've spoken.
It's really nice to meet you. It's really, really exciting this happening. So yeah, I can't wait to be there.
Yeah, we're hoping very much that you're with us in person, and we're gonna work on the basis that you'll be there out with us in Arizona next week. But just before we came on this recorded call, you were talking about revisiting the piece because it's been a few years since you wrote it. So could you just dive back in where we left off?
Sure. So I wrote this back in it was 2013, I think. And coincidentally, a couple of years ago, I revisited the whole thing for a new version for publication, and it was sort of fascinating going back into how I'd been writing at that time, because it's a piece that actually it's not been performed as much as things like My Requiem. So this is the US premiere, and I think there was a premiere in Australia which I couldn't make because of the pandemic, and we had a few movements in the Concertgebouw. Over in the Netherlands, but I actually, since the premiere, I've never seen the full work performed, so it's really exciting for me to see it all come together.
Well, we've loved getting to know it, and I'm excited for you to hear it and feed into what we're doing because it's always great to be collaborative with living composers when we're able to perform their works. I think I was drawn to the piece not just because of the sound world, which I'd love to talk about in a moment, but also the incredible text. And I wondered, I know that obviously through listening to your Requiem written for your mother, that you have quite a deep connection with text and composition through elements of your own life and experience. So how did you come to write this piece and choose the text?
Mm. Well, the caveat with any of this conversation is that I'm going to try and remember sort of 2013 me, so I'm not sure how accurate it will be. But I think so at the time, I was the commission was around celebrating music, and I wanted to write a piece that was broadly celebratory, but I didn't want something that just talked about that single aspect of music because I think it's so multifaceted in its ability to sort of both evoke and kind of transcend our experiences, and it does that in so many ways. So one of the things this piece explores is creating these sort of magical worlds that we can disappear into. But also, I mean, there's this incredible text by Sifu Sassoon in it, which talks about how in the middle of war and death and destruction, music is protecting him, and it gives you this sort of internal space and world that you can kind of draw strength from. And there's also the idea of music connecting us back to people that are no longer here. Like it has such incredible transformative power. So I was interested in exploring the different ways that that could be represented.
And I think that's what spoke to me when I first explored the work because it's really given its name to our whole concert series, which we're calling Transcendence. And the concept behind it is by putting contemporary music together. It's all contemporary. So we have a piece by Anna Torvaldsdottir, the Icelandic composer. There's an
Mm.
Arvo Pärt just string piece, The Countess and Maureen Benjamin Britten, which is a beautiful way to open the performance, I think. And then a cycle by Ola Yelo. So it's the first half is incredibly Nordic and it's just string orchestra with percussion. And then the second half is all about your piece. And all the questions we might be asking as a result of the first half music are answered, I think, in your writing and also in the setting of the text with its incredible refrain or, the exhortation, if you cannot teach me to fly, teach me to sing. And I think for so many musicians, particularly singers, this is our outlet. It's our way of going beyond the worldly and putting any of our cares into a drawer and stepping away from that for a moment and just reveling in this incredible power and gift that we have to communicate through song. Obviously backed by an incredible orchestra as well. And interested to hear about you talking about these little sort of the filmic vignettes almost, because one thing that struck me is it's extraordinary how in six movements, none of which is above 6 or 7 minutes in length, you take us on this incredible arc from what can be a tiny opening sound to an incredibly expansive, almost, without meaning to compare you, almost John Williams-esque, enormous fanfaric zenith.
I mean,
And
I'm
then
very flattered by that
and and then all
comparison.
the way down
Fair
again
away.
to down to a tiny finish. And I don't know whether my singers enjoy this or hate it, but I'll always draw little analogies. And I can hear bits of Beauty and the Beast, and I can hear bits of Indiana Jones, and I can hear bits of Benjamin Britten actually, in the rhythmic intensity
Totally.
of the fourth movement in particular. And I think, the Sassoon does have an incredibly haunting quality. So it's lovely to hear you talk about that. But there is that transcendence, that sense of going beyond and otherworldly in the music. What's the emotional journey that you want to conjure, if at all, through this music and across the piece?
Mm. Well, it's interesting hearing you talk about all those references because I think inevitably, I mean, the music that we write is always a reflection of kind of where we are at the time. And I was in my mid-20s when I was writing this piece, so it sort of represents all the influences that I'd had till then. And I mean, I was a film music obsessive growing up. I was sort of obsessively poring over the scores of John Williams and getting so excited about how he created these orchestral colours. And same with a lot of the great symphonists, I'd say. So kind of, I think there's Ravel references in there and Debussy, and there's I was kind of fascinated by orchestral colour, and I really wanted to kind of push the envelope of what I'd been writing with because I had this great opportunity of a large choir and orchestra. So a lot of it is about like how can I really kind of plumb those depths? But in terms of the question was sort of about the journey. I think it's about trying to be sort of transport people. So I think my very early ideas when I was thinking about writing the piece was potentially doing something that was directly programmatic. So I'd been looking a lot at the big this classic the Peach and the Wolves and these kind of programmatic
Mm.
things. I decided that wouldn't work for the piece in question, but I really wanted to kind of draw us in that sense. So when it first starts, the choir hopefully will have a bit of fun doing. They get to sort of whisper a lot of things, and the idea is that they're creating this kind of forest of music, which is really going to draw us in. And then we just kind of go on this evocative scenic journey, I think, which should hopefully take us through these kind of beautiful musical landscapes, these sort of transcendent um, situations, which is partly and it's partly a sort of geeky fascination with both like the way that we can use color in the choir and orchestra to sort of create these incredible textures, and also just with modulations and what they can do to sort of uplift and move us. So I was really interested in trying to incorporate a lot of different aspects there. And then journey wise, it gets more serious as we go on. So there's a moment that we talked about in war, and there's a darkness. Um, and then there's a movement that deals with loss as well, and also kind of bringing in what are hopefully strong themes. So one of the things that I was keen to do was um, to make sure that as well as kind of exploring color and sort of shifting colors and textures with the orchestra, to make sure that there were moments where we could have a real melodic focus. Because again, I grew up just like loving a good melody, and
Yeah.
I wanted to try and get a couple of those in there. So yeah, hopefully there are a couple of movements that deal with that. And then by the time we get to the last movement, it's just sort of a big I think fun musical cacophony of the joy of music, and should finish with a bang, I hope. But yeah, a lot of color in there, and a lot of really kind of going for it for the choir and the orchestra, I think.
Yeah, it felt that way. I mean, fascinating. You wrote it in your twenties, really. I think when we're most alive in some ways, that mid-20s, we finally become perhaps who we're going to be, or we know roughly who we are, and all these influences can
Yeah.
go into a melting pot, and then you sort of they've been spewed out in this incredible. I mean, the number of instruments, the richness of the instrumentation, and the way that the arc of each movement rises and falls it's so exciting to listen to. It's anticipatory, and particularly the fourth movement. I was talking to a, an interviewer on Arizona PBS a couple of days ago about the fact that he really likes the fourth movement because it feels so motion led, almost as though you're on a ship out of the water. You're on this ship, and you're sort of my daughter Bella, who's also a huge film music geek, and really likes your music and loves John Williams as well. It made her think of the sort of Voyage of the Dawn Treader episode of Narnia, where they're sort of going for this quest and this mission, and the music is, you can hear the flurries of the wind and the birds overhead, and then you've got that almost sort of Chopin Rachmaninoff moment with the solo piano descending in sequence after one of the big
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
moments, and
yeah.
it's incredibly evocative, and it's enormously fun, and you feel ripped into emotional pieces in a very short space of time. But particularly the middle sequence for me, I think movements 3, 4, and 5, the way that they're juxtaposed, and they do deal with serious topics, but the ending idea is, whatever I feel anyway, what I've taken from it is whatever obstacles are being put in our way, however we feel about difficulties in life, there is always music and there's always singing, and that can draw us out of it. It transcends the mundanity and the pain of life. So yeah, no, I've really enjoyed that, and I think, I mean, we've talked about musical influences. You've talked about the film score influence and John Williams, and then Ravel
Mm,
and others. Was there anything in particular you tapped into when writing this piece, would you say?
mm. I mean, again, it's hard to remember exactly what, but I know that in terms of what was going on for me in my life at that point. Well, I'd grown up singing a lot in choirs, so doing all the big works, I guess, and that was always an influence. But at that point in my life, I was assisting a TV composer he does all the music for Call the Midwife now, and I'd also been working with so the orchestrator Jeff Magian, who just did the orchestration for Wicked. He's a genius orchestrator, and kind of proteges of him, who we were spending a lot of time kind of geekily deconstructing, the orchestration of different schools and what worked. So I think I was kind of in an environment where that was feeding a lot
Mm,
into it, and a lot of nature scores as well. So I think that's definitely an element. But yeah, in combination with the classics. So yeah, I mean, I've talked about the sort of color of Ravel and Bruce Stravinsky, or and then the Bernstein, the Chichester Psalms, that kind of thing. There's I mean, what else would have? I think Vaughan Williams was probably, you can hear a bit of him in there. So yeah, it was a sort of a combination of the classic influences on me growing up and the film music world that I was working at the time.
nice. Yeah. And we're going to have audience members who haven't heard your material. And if you were to speak to somebody who's listening to Rebecca Dale for the first time, what would you say to them? What do you hope that they take away from her music sounds? And how would you describe your compositional voice?
Um, well, first, it's probably tricky to answer as the composer. It's probably not for me to say. In a way, I think that other people are kind of best placed to speak on that. But I guess there are a couple of things I'd say there. First, I find it tricky as a composer to be too specific, because I think one of the things that is very helpful if you're working as a composer is to be thinking in terms of constant development. So you don't want to get too stuck in doing one thing. And the idea of, I feel like who was it who said, it might be Missy Mazzoli. I did some masterclass for her, but talked about being on that your series of musical pieces is basically a sort of constant work in development, where you're moving gradually from one thing to the next, and every time you're writing something, you're looking at moving in a slightly different direction. So it can be helpful not to pigeonhole yourself too much. That
Mm,
said, there are always things that you're going to gravitate to. So for me, that's always going to be orchestral color. That's always going to be the choir, because I grew up as a choral singer, and it's a huge love of mine. And I'm always going to have a great love of melody, and of things that can just kind of sweep us off our feet a bit. So I think those are probably a bit my calling cards. I don't know, it's probably for someone else to say. Something along those lines, but
no,
something
thanks.
that's
That's useful.
kind of
No.
evocative and full of color, and hopefully full of melody as well.
Yeah. So lovely melodic lines, and hopefully the audience will take away a mental imagery which you're creating through the palette of the orchestral sound. So that's, yeah,
That'd be great.
I think that's right. I'd go along with that. And then finally, just before we finish, what are you working on at the moment, if you're allowed to tell us? And are there any more
Um,
choral pieces in your future?
yeah, there are. So I'm working on a big choral work that I'm very excited about, but I'm not really allowed to say much about.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but it's very magical in quality. I've kind of come back to these ideas that I was really loving um, back then. Yeah, I'm there are various new textures of the choir in combination with different instruments that yeah to create a sort of enchanting quality that I'm looking at in a longer form work. Um, but yeah, I like to I guess I like variety as well. So I'm releasing an album um, of work from my the film music side of things, which is quite experimental in quality. It's got lots of kind of strange vocal techniques, but
Hmm.
then I'm also doing some quite kind of crossover commercially straight choral works that should be very performable. So yeah, there's a kind of variety of things going on, and then yeah, there are various kind of longer form theatre works that I'm involved in as well. So that's
Exciting.
quite fun. I'm working on a dance piece, which I'm excited about, and actually has choir in too. So that's going to be interesting.
Brilliant.
Um, yeah, I'm looking at the moment at how to sort of incorporate the choral sound with what's going on stage. So yeah, lots of a bunch of interesting things.
That's good. It means we can hear lots more of you in the coming years, as I know people are going to want to once they've heard When Music Sounds. So just a reminder, Rebecca's pieces, Clots of Heaven and When Music Sounds, we're performing, Phoenix Chorale performing on the 24th and 25th of January next weekend at Scottsdale Center for Performing Arts, 7:30 on Saturday evening and 2 o'clock on Sunday lunchtime. So do come and join us there. Rebecca, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate your speaking to us, and we look forward to seeing you in person in a week.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Thanks.